good evening and welcome. We're glad that you're here this evening. We know that there'll be a couple of other folks who'll be joining us here tonight. I understand parking is becoming a premium out front, so we're thankful to all of you for being here tonight. On behalf of the coalition and your school district, we are very grateful for you taking time from your busy schedules to be a part of what is a continuing dialogue here in our school and our community around mental health, wellness, suicide, and how do we help support those children that we love so much? How do we help support our neighbors? How do we support our colleagues? My name is Steve Salerno, and I'm your superintendent of schools here in Mount Horeb. And I consider it a privilege to be working in a community as thoughtful and as compassionate as the one that we enjoy living in. And I thank you so much for being a part of that. I read the other day that for every one completed suicide, there are 25 attempts that are made. If you extrapolate that into the impact that suicide has on children, our neighbors, other loved ones, it's incalculable. We know that, we've experienced that. And for each of you who are here tonight, I'm sorry for your loss. Many of us are still grieving, and grieving is a process. It's not linear, it's cyclical. Sometimes we feel like we're ready to get into the preventative work, and then suddenly we're taken back into the post-vention work. And so wherever you are in this process, I thank you for taking time to be here this evening. No doubt you're going to hear from several accomplished individuals this evening, and their research is very clear. You're going to hear this over and over again, that talking about suicide is important. It's not going to create more suicides, more attempts, but rather quite the contrary. It's going to help people to understand that there are people here to support them, people who love them. Sometimes we need to fill our gas tank a little bit, I think, and in order to be of a source of strength, a source of fortitude to those that we serve, we need to learn about how do we have those conversations with our children. Those are tough conversations to have. I know you're having them in your homes now, and we're having them with students in our schools, even as soon as tomorrow, again, another conversation. Some of you are here tonight because you yourself are hurting, or you're a caretaker of somebody who is hurting. And we hope tonight that through the process of introducing to you to a number of people, that you're going to be able to find the strength and the solace you need and supports you may need. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Your schools, the coalition, a number of community agencies, your medical providers, our police department, we're all in this together. And so I'd probably wear a t-shirt tonight that has been created by the coalition. It's part of the new fall 2018 fashion line. Not bad. And I want you to know that you can also get a nice shirt like this, and a number of us are wearing a shirt like this tonight. We wear it proudly. The money that's raised to help with these t-shirts are going to help be brought back into the community coalition that we have here that's been working now for the past 2 years. Our schools have been a part of that, therapists in the region, other people just care deeply about mission and support of those that we love. We meet every third Tuesday at 5 p.m. over at the Driftless Historium, and won't you please consider being a part of their good work. We are in this all together, and in that spirit, and to maximize that commitment of being all in this together tonight, I'm wondering if I can beg your indulgence on a couple of maybe group norms here tonight over the next 60 to 75 minutes of presentations. I'm hoping that you might be able to help us honor these. I know you can. Well, the first one being, of course, and many of us are still raw from what's occurred here. And it's absolutely okay if you need to excuse yourself at any point in time during our conversation. The second is, we're fortunate to have students like Sydney Swigum, and I think there's a couple more students back there. Isn't that right, Colleen Nessheim? Colleen, thank you for helping to organize having our students back there, and I want to also thank Kim Lins for bringing coloring books and other goodies so that our little ones can be well cared for back there as well. please know, though, that that's a resource for you. And sometimes, without intent to do harm, sometimes we speak about another person, or maybe even a child, in a way that allows that person's identity to become known. So I thank you for being discreet in your comments about other individuals this evening. And I thank you for being in the moment with us tonight. Just like they tell us at church from time to time, as a courtesy to all those giving of their talents tonight, we ask that you please silence your cell phones and these sorts of things if you haven't done so already. These kinds of events, they allow you to connect with people in ways that you hadn't had the opportunity to connect with them. You make friends in sometimes some of the darkest hours, and one of the people who I'm proud to call a friend is our very first presenter, somebody who has really been a source of strength and inspiration for this entire community. I'm speaking of Mrs. Angela Willits. Angela is here, right in front of me, so I need my glasses. Can we give a warm welcome to Angela Willits?
Steve already gave a nice introduction to the Mount Horeb Mental Health and Wellness Coalition, and we have some open seats in the front for folks who are standing in the back if you are so brave to walk up to the front. So the coalition is open to anyone. You don't have to have a mental health background. You don't have to have a child, a student in the school district, really any community member who's interested in the mental health and wellness of our community. So we have the ways to find us online. We've got a great Facebook page that Tia Fagan makes look really good all the time, and we have a coalition email. In the back on an orange piece of paper, if you want to receive our emails, that will give you the minutes from our monthly coalition meetings, as well as information about events. You can write your name and your email on that orange piece of paper that's back there. Okay, so just to give you a sense of what we're going to talk about in the rest of our time together, I'm going to start off by talking about talking to a loved one about suicide. So this includes a loss from suicide, as well as talking to a loved one about their own thoughts about suicide and exploring if those are there. And then Nicole Schroder is going to talk about how do I know if my child is in a mental health crisis. And then Nancy Pierce is going to talk about if you find that you or a loved one or your child are in a mental health crisis, what do I do and what happens and what are the next steps. We'll then sort of wrap up the formal presentation part by talking about upcoming events in the community and mention of community resources. And at that time, I'll invite anyone that we have in the audience this evening who is a resource for the community when it comes to emotional wellness and support. So we have some clergy here, we have a person here from the crisis text line. We'll give people the opportunity to do that at that time. And then we're going to open it up to questions, and then give us time from about 7:30 to 8 o'clock to really just talk with one another and converse. So we hope people stick around for that portion to really build more community. You have a half slip of paper on your chair. You can fill that out at any time, and then before you leave, you can turn that into one of us in these snazzy t-shirts. And that's really for us to just get a sense of what do you have questions, thoughts, or concerns about, and what's something you'd like to see from this community, and those might give us ideas, those of us in the coalition, ideas for what should our next steps be, what could we be doing, and what are your ideas around that. Okay, so we have a sense of what we're going to do. Just a reminder to all of you here, Dr. Salerno set up some good ground rules for us to think about. Just some heads up, talking about death, loss, suicide is difficult. This is a really difficult topic. So, you may find yourself, as you're listening to us presenting tonight, having thoughts like questioning yourself or wondering if you could have done something differently. we just really invite you to be kind with yourself if that emerges for you, and absolutely do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So recognize if you're having a tough time or if something's hitting you really hard, and then do whatever works for you. So that might be some deep breathing, that might be distracting yourself for a little bit, maybe even stepping away. All of those things are totally fine, and take care of yourself as we move through these presentations. Okay, so talking to a loved one about suicide, and we'll start with when a child's friend dies by suicide, because we've had those experiences in our community. So this question came up a lot. I have a fourth grader, going into fifth grade son myself, and so had personal experience with talking to him about Charlie Bledsoe, who passed away. And so I was doing a lot of research on how do I have this conversation. Everything that I found, and there's some materials back on the back table, tell us that you need to tell the truth in ways that are age appropriate to your child. So my son, who's 10, is familiar with the word suicide and the concept. I work in mental health and teach mental health, so already knew the research on you need to be talking about suicide with your kids. So it was already a conversation that we had had. So he was familiar with the concept. So the literature does recommend telling the truth in ways that you're comfortable sharing, in language that your child can understand. Short, simple sentences without unnecessary detail, especially when you're first sharing the news with anyone who's experienced a loss, tends to work better than giving a lot of information in the beginning. While well-intentioned, secrecy and deception can cause unintentional harm. So what I'm referring to there is if we talk about someone who died by suicide in a way that doesn't tell the truth about how they died, it can lead to unintentional harm. And a couple of ways that can happen is it perpetuates the stigma about suicide. It suggests or promotes the idea that it's this thing that we shouldn't talk about, or it's this thing to be ashamed of or keep secret. Children, especially, who, developmentally, they are the center of their universe, which means when things happen to them, it's because of what they did. When things happen to people that they love, it's because of what they did. They sort of revolve around themselves. They will try to fill in the gaps when they hear about a death or certainly a suicide. And so without clear information, we're sort of leaving it up to them to fill in those gaps. The other reality is that there's a good chance that the child will hear about it elsewhere. And so wouldn't you rather have them hear from an adult that they trust, so you, rather than maybe a peer or someone in their own age group or somewhere else? So those are some recommendations for sort of delivering the initial news. And then when it comes to grieving, the caveat here is that none of us are probably particularly good at grieving. It's sort of a thing that you learn as you go and move through from moment to moment. So when talking with certainly children or any loved one about the death of someone, including a death by suicide, expressing your own sadness, and in the case of suicide, confusion, I don't know why this happened, or I don't know how it happened, I'm so sad, and really modeling for your child what grieving looks like is such our kids don't know how to grieve. They're looking to us to see how we grieve, and so if we cry in front of them, we let them know it's okay to cry. And if we laugh in front of them, even in the midst of grief, we let them know it's okay to be happy, and to find things funny even in the midst of grieving. So we give a lot of permission and show them what's okay. We can normalize their grief, so saying, "This is so sad, I can see how hard this is. It it makes sense, you're so sad. So when I spoke with my son, I had sort of prepared, to talk with him. I was just saying these things over and over. This is so sad. I know this is so sad. So many people are hurting right now. And really just normalizing what was coming up for him was, really the only thing that I could say. You want to let your child know there's no right or wrong ways to experience grief, so there's not a right way to do it, so you don't have to stay sad all day long. Like I said earlier, you can laugh. And most importantly, do more listening than talking. So once you deliver the news of a loss, give them space to have their response, their reaction, and just sit with that reaction. And you don't have to try to take it away or fix it or make it better. Just give them the space to sit with that response and to sit with that pain. And then another thing that we can do in the midst of grief is introduce opportunities for remembering. So not only remembering the death, and in the event of suicide, because there's so much confusion and pain around the loss and the death, we can get really attached to that, and that can be a big part of our mental energy. But with any grieving, it's important to also remember the person who lived and remember their life. A little story that just happened today as I was, preparing for this talk. My son was going into 5th grade. We went shopping for sneakers and somehow got on the conversation of who are the jocks, who are the boys that are jocks in his grade, and he is not a jock. And so he was listing off the boys who are jocks, and then he said, Charlie's not a jock. And then he caught himself and he said, Charlie wasn't a jock. And I said, Drew, it's okay to talk about Charlie. He's still in your mind and he's still in your memories. And so I was giving him permission around, this is a part of grieving, and this is okay. So when it comes specifically to a suicide death, there are some more difficult conversations that come up. So the two tougher questions are, why did this person end their life? So the why question. And then how did they do it? So, we're naturally curious creatures. And I think it's very normal when we hear about someone who died by suicide, our mind pretty quickly goes to how. How did they do it? Perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of fear or concern. So these are normal questions to have. And I've provided some for the question of why. The way that I worded it is, I have that question too. And I don't know. And I might never know. We might never know. And that's very true. The thing to remember about suicide is there's never one cause for suicide. So we can't possibly point to one thing and say, here's why it happened. People spend a lot of mental energy searching for the here's why it happened, but that's generally an impossible question to answer. So the truth is, the harder thing to sit with is that we most likely may never have the answer to the why question. And so we can sit with that. I don't know, and share that with our children. The other question about how did they do it, so again, to that modeling as parents and loved ones, we can avoid gossiping or guessing about how someone died by suicide, just as a rule, just try to avoid it if you can. But also keeping the information truthful but simple. So in the case of talking with children, you might say, she took too many pills. Or the thing that I said to my son was, he hurt himself and his body stopped working. And I don't know how. That's all that I know. And that was good enough. That was all that, he needed to know. He, may be wondering more, but my honest answer is I don't know. I don't know. While these questions can weigh heavily on us and can come up a lot, the most important thing to remember and that we can convey convey to our children and loved ones is that the person was feeling so terrible and their thinking was so unclear that they didn't realize the consequences of what they were doing. And so they were in so much pain, or this illness, depending on the person, had such a hold on them. And so that's an important message that we can send as well. Okay, so we're going to shift now to talking to someone about suicidal thoughts. So you may be thinking, well, gosh, this is kind of an abrupt shift, Angela. You just got done telling us about, I'm not sure why that advanced, about talking about sort of breaking the news to someone about a loss from suicide and grieving and answering these difficult questions. The reason this comes right after is because having exposure to the death of someone by suicide creates opportunity for this conversation. That's not to say that you shouldn't otherwise have this conversation, because you should. But certainly in the midst of talking about suicide and losing someone to suicide opens this door. So a popular myth, I was on a radio interview this morning, and the radio person didn't believe me when I said this is a myth, but it is a myth. The literature supports this. There's this belief that if we talk about suicide with young people, it will give them ideas. It will plant ideas in their head, or have them start thinking about something that they wouldn't have otherwise been aware of or been thinking about. That is a myth. Asking someone about suicide, if they've had thoughts of killing themselves, will not make him or her suicidal. And it will not plant those thoughts in their head. Once young people get to a certain age, they know what it is. They have heard about it. They're familiar with it. So a way to think about this, especially with teens, is that we should talk about suicide just like we talk about those other things we worry about with our adolescents. So drugs, alcohol, sex, their physical health, right? Their grades. We should also be talking about mental health, perhaps depression or anxiety, and suicide. And it should be a part of the conversation. So I have this image here that says suicide is a preventable public health problem. It is very true that suicide is a public health problem. It's the second leading cause, and this is according to the CDC, the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34. Dr. Salerno gave for every death by suicide, there's 25 attempts. I found data that says it's much higher than that. And suicide is often underreported, and suicide attempts. Approximately 17% of youth seriously consider suicide. So about 1 in 5 seriously consider. Adding to that is that more passive thoughts like, oh, I wish I didn't wake up tomorrow, or oh, it'd be so much easier if I just wasn't alive. Most of us in this room can relate to having a thought like that at one time or another, right? And it doesn't mean we are in a mental health crisis. I know I've had that thought before, where things are really difficult, life is really hard, and we have those thoughts. So thinking about not being alive, dying, is not outside of the norm of reality. So it should be something that we're talking about. I feel like I'm now turning into a broken record, but I want to say that really clearly. It's something we should be talking about. We must ask, do you ever have thoughts of suicide? And in a moment, I'm going to give you ways for how you might ask that, different ways you could go about it. So as I said earlier, exposure to loss from suicide should open up a meaningful conversation and framework for future talks with your kids and teens. Research shows that more discussion is better, not worse. So it is something we should be talking about. And in that conversation, it's okay to tell your kids, I love you, or to say, I'm worried about you. or to say, I would be devastated if you died by suicide. Those are all important and okay things to say. So then, if you're on the same page with me, that this is something that we should be talking about, then you're probably wondering, okay, how do I bring it up? How do we talk about it? So this is, and these questions we can make available and send them out to folks. So as a therapist, I teach students how to do therapy. And they always want me to, they're always looking for like, well, what's the way that you say this? How exactly would you ask this? And I learned from, I want someone to give me the exact questions, like what's the exact wording, right? Here, how do you say this? So I'm giving you some samples of the wording, of the ways that you might ask it, but there is no perfect, exact, precise way to ask this, okay? It can come very naturally. So if you were to talk to a loved one or child about suicide and it wasn't in one of these ways, that's okay. It's more important that you're talking about it. But here are some options, some ideas for how you might bring it up. So the first one, we start off by normalizing, as I did just a moment ago. These are thoughts that people sometimes have. Sometimes people wonder what it would be like to end their life. Is that something you've ever thought about? Another thing that we can do is recognize the pain that the person is in. So that they're really hurting or they're suffering, they're in a lot of pain. With all the pain that you feel, have you ever just wished that you were dead? Seeing what they say, and then we might follow that up with, do you ever think of killing yourself? If you have, let's say, an adolescent who has had exposure to someone who has attempted suicide, you might say something like, I've heard that sometimes being around peers making suicide attempts can make other kids think about suicide themselves. Have you had any thoughts about suicide? Right, so we start off kind of just normalizing, generally opening it up, but then we want to ask in a direct way, have you had these thoughts? Have you had thoughts about suicide? Do you ever feel that kind of sadness and hopelessness, and what would you do if you did? Could be another kind of way at getting at it. Is this something you and your friends are talking about? Do you have any friends that you're worried about? And when you say, and this is just an example, I can't handle this anymore, what do you mean? Right? All of those are things that can help bring us into this conversation. Something that so I just got done saying there's no wrong way to bring this up. There is one thing that we can do that could actually lead to, well, there's things we could do that could lead to a person not responding truthfully. And I used to see this sometimes in my clinical work. Someone would be asking a client about suicide, but they would say, no thoughts about harming yourself, right? So they would start off by saying, here's what I want you to tell me. I want you to tell me no. I'm not ready to hear you tell me yes. So we could easily fall into that, right? You're not having thoughts of killing yourself, are you? Right? So that's going to set the stage for, I'm telling you the answer that I want you to give, right? And it could shut the person down. Does that make sense? It's a slight difference. So we ask it without any sort of leading message. Okay, so you've asked it. You've done it. Yes, way to go. Now, what do you do? What do I do next? Listen. It's in big letters there because it's the most important thing. Create space. Be patient. Listen to what the person has to say. And they might just say, no, I've never thought about that. And then you might say, okay, well, I want you to know if you ever did, I hope it's something that we could talk about. I would want you to talk with me about it. That's the exact conversation that I've had with my son not too long ago. Really listen without judgment. And as much as you can, don't jump in with advice, problem solving, fixing, overreacting with maybe fear or anger, all of that is going to shut the person down and close them off, right? So we listen non-judgmentally. We may, get to the point where we step in with expressing, sharing advice, thinking about what to do next, how do we get you help, or what do we need to do. But initially, you want to hold the space so that the person can share freely. Now, I realize that's a little small, so I'm going to tell you some of the what not to say. So if a person, I know for me as a parent, if my child were to say, yes, I've had thoughts of suicide, sometimes I really think about it, I would be scared and devastated, and I would want to do everything I could to let them know, like, no, you can't, like, don't, please don't. But that is another thing that's going to shut the person down. So saying things like, but you have so much to live for, or sort of invalidating their pain. Things could be worse. I mean, it's not that bad. Saying things like, don't you know how much that would hurt me? How could you think of hurting me like that? Or suicide is selfish. You're just going to give your pain to everyone else, or you don't mean that. You don't really want to die. You're just trying to get attention. So if we're on the same page that these are conversations that we should be having and need to be having, we want to open the door for them to occur, not close that door, and these are examples of things that could close that door. So then, after we've listened, and especially if the person says, yeah, I have, sometimes I do, the next thing we can say is, that must be awful to feel that way. Tell me more. And then we can listen some more. So listening is the take-home message here. If you have serious concerns for a loved one, and in a little bit, Nancy Pierce will come up and talk more specifically about this, including the crisis lines. If you have decided, I need to have this conversation, I'm just really uneasy about having it, or I don't know how to have it, or I'm not sure the person could stay safe if I have it, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and you can either get some tips or help or support, or you could put your loved one on the phone, or you could be on the phone together. So that is another option. Okay, so in the interest of time, so I have my teacher brain on, and I have been resisting the urge this whole time to say, any questions about that? You have those sheets. Please jot down your questions, but in the interest of time, we've decided to hold the questions till the end, so please jot them down. And I'm going to bring up a fellow coalition member, an awesome person, Nicole Schroder, to talk about how do I know if my child is in a crisis.
All right, well, thank you so much for allowing me to guide this part of the conversation around how do I know if my child is in a mental health crisis. So just a little bit of background. I spent probably the first, 8 years or so of my career on a crisis response team as a part of a community mental health agency out in Colorado. And then actually, unfortunately, had a suicide that hit pretty close to home, and just found after that it was sort of an area that I really struggled with. And so a lens that I probably bring at this point is around prevention. And so just wanting to name that, as Steve sort of mentioned, that within the audience here, we all have a story, and we all sort of bring a different aspect to things. So there's many reasons why someone might choose or contemplate suicide. And when we are touched by suicide, oftentimes, like Angela has said, the question that comes to mind is why, or what has happened that has caused this person to complete suicide. So there's been a lot of long and difficult research done around this topic, And what we know is that the answer to this topic is really, or this question is really complex, and it's just really complicated. What we know is that the research has found that the basic motivation for suicide is the feeling of just utter despair and hopelessness. But how a person reaches that point is what varies from one to another. So I thought that around this conversation of, is my kid or a person that I know in a mental health crisis, we need to sort of present emotional well-being and social emotional well-being sort of on a spectrum. And so we know that human behavior, child, adolescent, adult behavior, that there are sort of typically challenging behaviors that kids and adolescents and even adults experience. And so on one end of the spectrum, we have sort of challenging behaviors that we might see as part of typical development, or things that might be part of just human experience, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have behaviors that would indicate just really significant and life-threatening safety concerns that might require crisis intervention. So some of the things when we are determining risk as a clinician, and that I think is really helpful, just as loved ones to think about. So like I said, we always want to be mindful of the developmental stage of the person that we're sort of wondering about. So we want to ask, this fly is bringing me some humor, I think, to ease my taking care of myself. So what is the typical social emotional behavior of of a child that age? And for a typical person, like, you probably don't know, but there are wonderful resources within your school, family, or medical provider that would, I'm sure, be happy to help you explore that. The other thing that we want to look at is the frequency. So how often is this concerning behavior happening? The duration, or how long has this concerning behavior been going on? The intensity, or like the magnitude of this behavior, how much of this behavior, how intense does this behavior get? And then the impact on functioning. So we're looking at, are these behaviors impacting this person in multiple settings? So at home, school, work, peer relationships. So like we've identified, the topic of suicide and why it happens is really, really complex, and there's just a lot of unknowns. There's been a lot of research in this area, and what we know is that there are some vulnerabilities that can cause a greater risk maybe to a person. Along with that, we know that there are also some protective factors. And so again, if we think of vulnerability and protective factors sort of like on a fulcrum, where your fulcrum, think of like a teeter-totter, and the fulcrum is in the middle, we do know that some people's fulcrum does not start in the middle. Some of us have maybe genetic predispositions, or born into a family that has trauma or things of that nature, and so the fulcrum may start back here. But the way that risk factors and protective factors sort of work together is that while we might have a risk factor that sort of tips the teeter-totter one way, there's also protective factors that, when in place, bring that fulcrum back more towards the center. So again, I just want to make sure that we're mindful that this list that I'm going to go through is not necessarily an all-inclusive list, but it's a pretty good list of what we know. So also just that some of these risk factors we know they can't be changed. You know, we're not blaming anyone or anything. It's just things to be really mindful of. So some of these vulnerabilities that can increase risk of suicidal behavior are around behavioral health conditions, so having a prior behavioral health or mental health diagnosis, having previous suicide attempts, a history of self-injury or genetic or biological vulnerability or predisposition. Some personal characteristics, as we know, individuals who have sort of a low frustration tolerance, low tolerance for stress, low self-esteem, difficulty in problem solving or difficulty in coping, lacking belonging, and just a person's sort of capacity to injure themselves. We also know that there are adverse life experiences or stressors that can attribute to a vulnerability. As Angela mentioned, exposure to suicide of a peer, breaking up with a girlfriend or boyfriend, significant disciplinary problems, bullying, both being a victim and a perpetrator, having issues at school or in the work environment, and then a history of various types of abuse. Vulnerability also would include risky behaviors such as engaging in alcohol or drugs, delinquency, significant aggression or violence, and then also risky sexual behavior. There's also some family characteristics, so namely family history of suicidal behavior or completed suicide, parental mental health conditions, especially when those mental health conditions might not be treated or managed, parental divorce, death of a parent or a close loved one, and then just issues in the parent-child relationship. So that might be a parent who is overly critical, or maybe a parent who is sort of underreacting. Environmental factors, we know that access to means leaves somebody vulnerable. Again, exposure to suicide, negative social emotional environment at school, lack of just connectedness to somebody within the school environment, lack of acceptance if somebody is experiencing maybe some differences that might not go with like the cultural norms of the environment that they're in, and then limited access to mental health care. So the good news is that there's also some protective factors that reduce the probability of suicide, and like I had mentioned, kind of brings that fulcrum back towards sort of balance or equilibrium where we all sort of like to live. And these protective factors are things that can just really act as a buffer. I think Nancy finally got the fly. Okay, so some things that we look for are just individual characteristics, or you might hear of like a temperament, so just overall psychological well-being, that a person just sort of has the ability to, bounce back. They have good coping skills. They have the ability to problem solve. They feel loved. They are, maybe engaged in a spiritual practice that is affirming of life. They're participating in activities within the community, participating, in activities with family. So coming down to family and other social support. They have a parent that's warm and supportive, sort of using some of those listening strategies that Angela had talked about earlier. That they have help and support from people beyond their family, that they have just the sense of being loved. They know that there are people out there who love them, and positive peer relationships. At school, people who have a positive school experience, again, connectedness to, a teacher, student services staff member, somebody at the school, that the school is a safe and welcoming environment, and that they are experiencing, adequate academic achievement. With mental health, not to say that a person, who has vulnerabilities, of having a mental health condition, but those who have access to, adequate mental health care, that's a huge protective factor. And then also restricted access to means. So we know that positive relationships and means reduction are critical. So if you take one thing away from all of this that I have just said, the impact of relationships and reduction of means are very critical. We can make sure that we are spending quality time engaging in active listening with our kids. That goes for, parents, caregivers, school staff, friends, so that they'll be more likely to communicate openly with us during times of distress. So we know that supportive and caring relationships are a crucial buffer for preventing a crisis. And sometimes kids might just need a listening ear or adult guidance to help them understand the emotional and physical changes that they're experiencing day to day. So something that, we hear a lot about is just the pressure that kids are under, or just people in general. We're so busy, and sometimes it's just a matter of kids or people needing help sort of navigating the typical developmental stage that they're at. However, if these symptoms are happening over a period of weeks to months and they're impacting the ability to function day to day, then we know that early intervention can mitigate risk. So if you believe that your child or a person of concern needs help, always trust your instinct. A majority of those who attempt suicide or complete suicide do give us warning signs, whether they're subtle or whether they're really abrupt. And so there's a list up here of symptoms that might be, depending on the stage of intervention, considered to be symptoms that might be lower in severity. And so intervention at this stage might be, just active listening, might be reaching out to your student services team at school to see if there might be a school-based service that they can participate in, might be reaching out to your primary care doctor, to have a conversation around development and concerning behaviors that you're noticing, and to, kind of start that assessment process of, are we heading into, more than, what a typically developing person of this age should be experiencing. And it might be accessing community mental health support at this point. So some of these things would be sadness, anxiousness or being worried, changes in eating or sleeping patterns, significant nightmares, trouble in school or declining grades or attendance, isolating from friends and activities, frequent tantrums or intensely irritable a lot of the time, frequent stomach aches or headaches with no physical explanation, a lack of enthusiasm, energy, or motivation, an overreaction to criticism, feelings of being unable to satisfy ideals, poor self-esteem or a sense of guilt, lack of concentration or forgetfulness, a lot of restlessness, constant motion or can't sit still for a length of time, agitation or spells of intense and just inexhaustible activity, fears around gaining weight, excessive exercising, excessive dieting, loses interest in things that they once used to enjoy, starting to get into substance use, and then even things like thoughts of suicide that are more passive, like I wish I wasn't alive anymore, or just like general sort of non-specific thoughts of wanting to end their life. So like Angela mentioned, you know, as a parent or as a loved one, if your loved one came to you and said, you know, I just wish that I could go to sleep and not wake up tomorrow. You know, internally we would be panicking. As a mother, that would be a crisis to me. But in the mental health world, that wouldn't necessarily be a panic. It would definitely be we need to, you know, reach out and sort of get some help. But like I said, this might be a stage where you would be reaching out to student services staff at your school, your primary care doctor, or seeking outpatient mental health in the community. So sometimes behaviors or symptoms become more intense and our concerns become more elevated, and then our conversation moves to more of a wondering around safety. And at this point, we would definitely, you know, want to probably be getting other professionals involved, you know, because this is sort of, if we name from prevention, early intervention, sort of low risk, moderate risk, crisis, you know, at this point we're talking about a moderate risk. So things that we are looking for in this that could also sort of tip into you know, a mental health crisis would be abrupt or dramatic change in mood, such as irritability, anger, rage, really significant anxiety, or really significant sadness, withdrawal from routine activities and relationships, a neglect of personal hygiene, dramatic change in sleep habits, such as sleeping more often or not sleeping well at all, elevated, irrational, or bizarre behavior, just general sense of hopelessness and despair, an obsession with death, giving away belongings, self-harm such as cutting or burning or engaging in risky or destructive behavior, substance abuse, thinking that his or her mind are controlled or out of their control, or somebody that is hearing voices. And then thoughts of suicide at this point might be thoughts of suicide, and maybe they actually have a way that they have thought about doing it, but they don't actually have an intent to act on it. And as you can see, probably the second column sort of moves, you know, sort of that trajectory a little bit further towards crisis. And so a crisis situation exists anytime that your child is no longer safe to himself or others, and when there's need for immediate action or intervention. So at this point, a person would be experiencing active suicidal ideation with an intent to act. So this would be a kid that is telling you, or a person that is telling you that they're having thoughts of suicide and they're considering acting on them. This would also be somebody who has a specific plan. So for example, next Thursday when I know my husband will be late at the office late, I plan to, and they share their plan. Now, when we get to this stage, Nancy is going to give us more information around this, but at this stage we would consider a person to be what we call an imminent danger to themselves or others. And so at this point, you know, the question around, do you feel like your child is in imminent danger to themselves or others? If those things are happening, the answer to that is yes. And so then the next question that we ask ourselves as, you know, caregivers or loved ones is, you know, can we keep our child safe right now? Can we keep this person safe right now? Or are they, you know, potentially going to act upon, you know, their suicidal thoughts right here in this moment? And so Nancy is going to come up and share what to do if this situation arises and you find yourself in a crisis. Sorry, sorry, I have one more slide. So I've covered a lot. Probably some of it is sort of like way over, the heads. But there is this sheet as a resource at the back that sort of conceptualizes. There's this acronym around FACTS, and this can be a really helpful guide as caregivers. So I would just encourage you all to pick up this resource. And then I will introduce, this is Nancy Pierce. She is from Journey Mental Health Crisis Unit.
Well, good evening. Are you ready to do something? I would be if I heard all that. I'd be saying, what can I do? And that's actually what I do. So, as you just heard, I work at the Mobile Crisis Unit at Journey Mental Health Center, which is located in Madison. I also live in Mount Horeb, so I'm part of your community. I think I have had this opportunity to work in many different times when there's been a crisis, often involving a youth in the community. I want to emphasize that even though we're focusing on youth this evening, I do want you to pay attention to the highest number of people who kill themselves are middle-agers, and the highest number of people, the highest risk, are elderly. So I want you to be aware this isn't just a youth problem, but we are going to be focusing on that. Sorry, youth who are in the audience, but you can look at your parents and say you too. I think the idea about what to do is important because this is something that we think you need to do something. This is not one of those, I think I'll do nothing and hope and wait and see what will happen. This is a do something kind of situation. And it's so important that law enforcement, fire, EMS, they're the major, often the first responders to mental health crisis calls in your community. So people live in the village, we're talking about the Mount Horeb Police. When people live in the county like me, it's the Dane County Sheriff. All of them have received training in mental health crisis, and all of them try to follow the protocol of consulting with the crisis unit. That means when I work at the crisis unit, I talk to the police probably a dozen times in a shift about a mental health crisis that could be occurring in Dane County. And it's usually around risk, and usually around suicide risk. Sometimes violence, but most often risk. So understandably, we think that if you're not sure, you have to decide, is my child, is my loved one, are others at immediate danger? That's a 911 call. That might mean saying, I've got this situation, I think I need help, because what that means is that things are not safe, you're losing or you've lost control, you're doing everything you can to maintain it, and you need help now. So I want you not to be shy about contacting 911, who are very used to these calls, so they will not be surprised when they hear from you saying, I need help. You can request, as Mount Horeb has, as well as Dane County Sheriff, officers specifically trained in mental health crisis calls. So you can say, is there someone on duty who has this training? If there is, they will try to accommodate, but not every officer is trained. Also recognize that when officers come to your home, and some of you have had the experience of police responding to your home, they take charge, because that's what the police are trained to do, and they take control, because they are very much wanting to make sure they're keeping things safe, and that one of the ways, and probably their training would say the best way, is to be in charge and control. So they may very much be deciding what happens next, and even where your child might be taken if things are very serious, and they're worried about immediate risk. The good news is that when an officer comes to your home, or fire, or EMS, they invariably call the crisis unit. So they consult with us on almost every call. even if it's an FYI, or I'm not sure, or what do you think? There are eyes and ears. So I often say, tell me exactly what's happening, and I can advise you as to what to do next. The other thing I'd recommend you do is to consider calling the crisis line yourself. The police will appreciate your calling them because you'll get their input. You'll be able to explain with as much detail what's happening so they can help walk you through this mental health crisis. So remember, yes, your child can call the crisis line, but so can parents, so can relatives, so can loved ones. This is something that the crisis counselor can help you determine what to do next, what to do now and what to do next. So I think Nicole and Angela said this, but I want to make sure when you talk to your children, it's important to let them know that they're not alone. Even if they're amongst many people, often people feel quite alone. Even if they're highly connected with their phones and their devices, they still feel quite alone. And that you're there for them no matter what. Nothing is so bad, nothing is so terrible that they can't call you. It's one of those, call me in the middle of the night. I'd rather you call me than drive home. It's the same kind of thing. It's important to reassure your children that people do have suicidal thoughts, but that does not mean they have to act on them. Often children, youth, are very frightened when they have these thoughts, and they automatically think, if I'm thinking it, that means I'll do it. And the answer is not necessarily. Do try to listen. That means try not to talk them out of or make them stop thinking about it. Don't discount feelings. Don't say, please don't feel that way. That's kind of, they're gonna get the clue of, I don't think I should talk about this anymore. Let your loved one, let your child know you want to help. And you are gonna get them the help they need. You're gonna connect them to services. Because in fact, you may be the very protective factor that lowers your child's risk in a suicidal crisis. So what you need to know. Most suicide risk assessments happen, sometimes they happen in homes, but more often than not, especially after hours, they're gonna happen at a hospital emergency room. I'm sorry, it's a long wait, it's a drive, but it's immediate. That means the help is right there. And you're gonna get all the services that can provide, including a possible hospitalization. That means you go with your child. If you call 911 and you don't feel things are safe and they come, they can provide a safe transport to the hospital and you follow. If your child's already receiving mental health services, you should call the provider. Every clinic, every agency has somebody on call that can respond to a crisis. So don't hesitate to call programs and therapists and counselors if in fact you're worried about your child that is either in a suicidal crisis or you think is moving towards one. Often children, or youth, when we talk to them, you'll find that they're not immediate risk. Yes, I've had these thoughts, but I have no intention of acting on them. I have no means. I'm not having a plan. And if you agree, if you kind of feel the same way, I still think you should have their risk assessed. Having done this for a lot of years, I think that it doesn't mean necessarily that they're suicidal, but something is happening. Something's going on that deserves some attention. So you either call the crisis line and say, help me to figure out where to bring my child, how he or she can get a risk assessment. You call the program, the therapist who's working with them, and provide your child with all the numbers you see up there. There's a local 24/7 crisis line that's there to help your child and just as importantly help you through the crisis. There's a national suicide lifeline. It's the 1-800 one, and there is now the relatively new, I think 2013, is the crisis text line. We're very fortunate to have somebody who volunteers on the text line with us this evening. I think, Angela, you mentioned you were going to identify people at the end. I was going to do it now. Brittany, just take a You have to do a little bit more than a hand up. Who volunteers, and she's going to be available because I think the crisis text line is something each one of you should know about. Texting is really becoming, it's really a remarkable service that's highly utilized, not just by youth, but clearly one that is strength-based and works. So I want you to know about that. So we have 3 resources that you can, that you want to give your child. Make sure you have it. Whenever I talk with a child and family, I say, do you have the number? Yeah, put it in your phone. I want to watch you put it in your phone. Everybody puts it in their phone so that they can access it right away. Please remember, as a parent, as a family member, as a loved one, you can call the crisis lines. They very often talk with people who are concerned about a loved one who might be suicidal. So I think the risk assessment issue is, I believe that, yes, you can handle the situation now, but you need to schedule a time, a place where your child can be seen as soon as possible. Does it have to be in the middle of the night? If you feel confident, convinced that your child is safe, and you're able to provide that in the environment that he or she is in, then you do need to contact people who specialize. If you don't know where to call, you can call the crisis line and we will give you the information and the direction you need to find somebody to do it. And you need to be a pretty fierce advocate for your child. It's a crisis. No, I will not wait 2 weeks. I need it now. And that, to me, is why it's considered a mental health emergency. I think that it is reasonable for you to bring your child's first step to the clinic where he's treated if they know him well and he or she well, and especially if they might even be treating your child for uncomplicated depression or anxiety, that they would be good resources. Sometimes children need to be hospitalized. We're talking about a voluntary, and that's usually when that your child, this youth, your loved one is at immediate risk for harm. Sometimes people are so desperate to harm themselves, they will harm anybody who gets in the way. So think about kind of a psychiatric hospital is kind of like an ICU. It's brief, it's just for acute situations, and usually the person is engaging in pretty risk-taking behaviors. Even if they're not suicidal, it's likely they'll end up being hurt or killed. When there's serious medical issues like drugs or alcohol, and we're talking about detoxification or some kind of weaning off of prescribed meds. Inpatient stays are brief. The goals are, the immediate ones are to reduce risk, to kind of restore the kind of state of stability in the family. Sometimes medications are used, therapies, families. But the important part is eventually, probably within a week, even less, your child will be discharged to home and community. So what I want you to know is that hospitalization can be very helpful in terms of keeping your child safe, but it doesn't necessarily treat the suicidality. Do you understand? Because the same problems are there, often, that were there before. So we're coming to the kind of the final part about how to keep your home safe and what kind of safety planning that you should use. I'm going to make a very quick word on if your child, if your youth, if your loved one refuses help and they're at immediate risk and they have a mental illness, the law allows people to be hospitalized, detained against their will, hopefully at a local hospital, but sometimes if the local hospitals are not available or are unable to manage the person, then the state hospitals are used. Emergency detentions involve law enforcement, so it could be Mount Horeb Police, Dane County Sheriff in your case. It involves the crisis unit. It involves the courts. This is a civil process. And there's a detention period where the person is usually under some kind of observation, but in a safe place. There's a hearing, and if probable cause, the person likely or probably has a mental illness and is at risk, it may result in some type of civil commitment. Those are the last resort. They don't happen often. But I want you to know, if you're worried and you're saying, I don't know what to do, they won't do anything, that there is this, this option that we try very hard not to do, but is available through the statutes, the mental health statutes for the state of Wisconsin, that allows people to be kept detained against their will. If they're under a Chapter 51, that's the state of Wisconsin's mental health statutes, they have to follow the terms of their outpatient conditions, keep appointments, follow treatment, take the prescribed meds, can't use drugs or alcohol, and you need to refrain from any self-harming or suicidal behaviors. What that means is somebody's closely monitoring that youth, that person, to ensure that they are under some kind of supervision and they're following treatment recommendations. So the suicidal crisis, you now have a sense of what I can do, who I can call. You heard me say loud and clear, this is a do something situation. If I can't do it, I'll find somebody to help me. I'll call the crisis center. I will find somebody in my life who can support me in this tough situation. But you need to determine after the crisis what to do, because that's sometimes the most important time. You want to consult with, is treatment indicated? If so, what kind of treatment? Your primary care, your pediatrician, your family practice can help you. Your clergy, your school mental health, all of those people can advise you about what services might work best. You need to consider, how can I make my home safer? How can my child transition back into the school and the community? That in and of itself, they might need extra support. And remember, probably the most important thing is that youth, all of us actually, but youth in particular, need to hear that hope is an essential part of recovery. If there's no hope, then many people will say, I give up. So hope is part of any kind of illness, if it's chronic, if it's ongoing, that we need hope. And sometimes we're reluctant to give it because we don't want to give false hopes, but youth need to hear. Often they're not informed. Many of us don't know much about mental illness or mental health, is that hope for recovery is a reality. It's not just a we hope, it's kind of a wing and a prayer, but it really happens, it works. People live full, successful lives, living with diabetes, asthma, and mental illness. You can do something when you go home tonight. Look, decide if you have somebody who's at risk. Remove all firearms, all weapons from your home, from your property. Don't think about that locking them up, that everybody knows the combination or they can bust through it. That having them on the premise, having them accessible, increases risk. Please consider as a safety issue only. It has nothing to do with gun ownership. It has to do with just safety for your child, for your family, to remove them. Lock up your over-the-counter, your prescribed meds. Please put away secure alcoholic beverages. Get rid of poisons, any kind of things that could be lethal means. Check how vehicles are used. This is not business as usual. You want to know where your child is, and that house rules often need to be adjusted. So it isn't just, you just came out of the hospital, just go at it, and you have no real, somebody checking on you, making sure you're safe. I think we need to be more aware and monitor risk carefully. And then finally, you and your child. I would do it before the crisis. That's my idea. I'm a safety gal. So talk to your child. If you were to be suicidal, how would I know? What are those warning signs? And don't assume what we had on the screen describes your child. It might be very different. There's no, and children don't walk around with signs, I'm suicidal, or they're not leaking this information, as in, you've just got such a good eye, I can see you, I know what you're feeling. I don't, I'm not a mind reader. So you want to ask your child, what might be the warning signs? How would I know if you're starting to feel bad, if you're starting to move into a crisis? List things I can do that would take my mind off of my problems, that it don't have to be necessarily involving another person. I might draw. I might do things that are kind of things I can do that are good, positive, internal distractions. Being on the internet, I would have some question about that. I would encourage things that are more expressive, things that help your child to feel like they can just sort of take a break and go to a good spot in their head. Have a list of those people and those places that can provide a positive distraction. Have it ready to go. And the people that you know you can call to ask for help. Professionals, programs that you can contact during a suicidal crisis. I hope when you leave, you'll be able to say, here's who I can call. I know this line exists that can help walk me through, that will answer my questions, that will even ask my child if I don't know how to ask or I'm comfortable asking if they're suicidal. That they'll be on the line with me, they'll come to my home, and they will meet with me and my child and walk me through it. And then finally, it is not a bad idea to say to your child, list one thing that's most important to me and that's worth living for. A reason for living. Because that's sometimes what I think we all need when we're feeling so much pain and so desperate and feeling exhausted. To think, this is the thing I can live for. This is the one thing that's so important to me. Thank you.
Okay, so in a moment, we'll ask our folks who are present in the audience, who are community resource, to stand and introduce themselves. But first, Dr. Salerno, did you want to talk about any upcoming events?
Yeah,
Or?
happy to. Good evening again. This is part of an ongoing dialogue that we will continue to have in our community, have been having in our community with the help of the Mental Health Community Coalition. We've had a number of symposiums here over the course of the past spring. In fact, we were fortunate to have Angela speak to stigmas. Tricia Norby, I know, is here. Good evening, Tricia, and Ron Heiss are here. They were here presenting a symposium recently around what are those kind of common myths, themes around suicide, mental health concerns. And then I saw Annie Byers somewhere. Where's our dear Annie? Hi, Annie. Annie is a leader among leaders in the area of mindfulness. 3 powerful symposiums that we had this past spring, and we hope to continue that good work moving forward. Our Board of Education continues to be a great support in this effort. They've allocated additional dollars so that we could partner with Catholic Charities to sponsor a program called Building Bridges. Has anyone heard of this program, just by a show of hands? It's really beginning to move the needle in helping families with resources and providing some really intensive support of families, and we're continuing to see some good results. We continue to apply for a number of those grants that have been made available through the Department of Justice. In fact, we just sent our letter of intent for that most recent update on the grant for an additional half-time social worker. Our goal there with that person is to help us identify what are those tier 2, tier 3 interventions that we can help support our kids in our response to supporting our children. And how do we help support the caretakers, our teachers, our staff, who work day in, day out, shoulder to shoulder with our students to ensure that they have what they need, that they have the support, the latest research, the training. And that's what we've been spending some time on now, considering the long-term kinds of things that we need to do in our planning efforts. I invite you to join us. August 11th, we're going to be having a training session, thanks to the good folks at the State Bank of Cross Plains, up on the 2nd floor if you've ever been up there. Beautiful conference area. And we plan on spending some time just talking about what are the 2 or 3 things schools should do, that the community should do, that are research-based. I'm so touched by the number of emails and phone calls that I've had from community members. I have stacks of them with just suggestion after suggestion after suggestion. You know, you should really do this. Or how about this? Or don't forget about this. This much is true. We're not going to be able to do all of them and do them well. So what are the 2 or 3 things that are evidence-based, research-based, that will help us get to breakthrough levels in this area? And so that's where we need people's help on August 11th. It's a Saturday. We'll get underway at 8 a.m. I want to thank Rod Heiss and Angela Willits for helping to coordinate this effort. And if you're interested in participating, you'll see some information on our district's Facebook page. I sent out emails to families and the like. Please do just sign up so that way we know we have enough space for everybody. But what about the kids? What about what the kids want? And that's not something that's been lost on any of us. In fact, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we're going to convene our second, listening session with our students. Last Thursday morning, we actually had a little luncheon for some students to help us just kind of identify what's missing in what we're doing. What do you need from us? And I'm so thankful. I talked about friends. We've made some friends along the way. Angela being a friend, Nancy being a friend, Nicole, thank you for your leadership tonight. We also made a friend in Lindsay Wallace from the National Alliance of Mental Illness. Lindsay, could you please stand for a moment, please? Good evening and welcome. Wonderful resource in connecting us and helping guide our work. I don't know all the answers. None of us know all of the answers, but we have great people to help us find our way. And so tomorrow we're going to reconvene with that group to talk about what are some things that they'd like us to do. We've got a research-proven program called Ending the Silence that we're going to talk with our students about. And I've been on the phone with a fantastic national speaker by the name of Medi Spies. Is anyone familiar with Medi's work? She is somebody that we're looking to potentially, with the students' approval and permission, to bring in to our school district, either at the tail end of August or the beginning of September. Just a delightful lady, well renowned in the area of health, mental health, counseling supports, and suicide prevention. And so these are the kinds of things that we want to continue to do. We have been doing. It's been a little more, I guess, maybe more of a silent campaign, but I think we need to bring and shine a light on it. And I'm thankful to each of you tonight to help us shine that light. The spotlight needs to be put on this. We need to have these conversations. And so with that spirit, maybe if we could please open up the floor to questions, comments, concerns, ideas. And if I maybe ask my colleagues who have helped present this evening to come up and join me here and see if there's any thoughts that you may have. I don't think the microphone goes very far, so maybe if you'd be able to speak loud and proud. Good evening, welcome.
I can speak loud.
Okay.
Recently we had a problem this last spring with a child who was threatening suicide. We had problems with the school district saying that an appointment was a full day of absence and that he needed medical excuses. This was already in March. We did not get medical excuses up to that point because we didn't realize that this would happen. Who do we write to, or what do we do if this happens? Where all of a sudden, towards the end of the school year, this child has to be committed for threatening suicide, and he doesn't have any time left.
Yes, please. Welcome, C.J. Goodwin, and thank you for your question. And those of you who didn't get a chance to hear it, sometimes we run out of our 10 days of parent excuse and our children need help. Who do we talk to about getting that support, getting that clarified? Welcome, C.J., school nurse extraordinaire.
I get this question a lot, being one of the district school nurses. So the best thing that you can do, especially if you don't anticipate your child to have an illness, something breaks, they need surgery, they're out for school, they have mental health needs. No matter their physical and emotional well-being, primarily, of course, we want them in school, but we also know that they have to take care of themselves physically and emotionally to be present in school. So the best thing to do in that type of a situation is to get notes from the point that the school requested them forward. And you can always go back to your provider. Most of them will go back a year for you and provide an excuse. Does that make sense?
Yes, but his mother was threatened with being put under arrest for her child not attending school, for being absent more than 10 days.
And were there notes provided to
It
cover
took us
those
a while
absences?
to
It
get
took you
that.
a while. Okay, so my recommendation would be to just continue to say, we are working on it. We are working on it. And sometimes that only adds to your stress, right?
Right.
That only adds to what's already present and going on when us as the school are
Yeah.
doing our job, yet not always realizing what's going on your end.
Right.
So continue to push forward to say, you know what, I'm working on it. And depending on who the letter comes from, because it depends on what school your child is in,
Right.
contact the person who sent the letter directly about the absences. Let them know, this is what's happening, this is who I've made contact with. You know, sometimes a doctor's office can take a day, 2 days, sometimes 4 days, depending on what unit you're calling or what department. It can take days for them to get back to you, right? And those days can feel like an eternity. So just keep plugging away and just keep the communication lines open.
It's a great,
Does that
great
help?
suggestion for all of us. Keeping those communication lines open. Thank you for the question. How about others? Yes, hi.
I'd like to know a little bit more about the texting, the crisis.
Could we use your expertise here in texting?
Hi everyone, my name is Brittany, and I'm a volunteer crisis counselor through the crisis text line. So there's actually, it's on the one flyer, it's the red rectangle, and then there are flyers literally all over the library, in the bathroom when you sit down. I noticed that. So yeah, there is like the phone. The phone hotline you can call. We are simply texting, which we're not just for youth, but it does seem like the numbers of people that we have are younger. It's an easier way to be honest with your feelings. And our main goal is to validate the person's feelings. And it's usually if somebody texts in, you text in hope, the word hope, to 741-741. And then you'll get connected, you'll get an automatic response that says, this is the crisis text line, we're here, we're gonna get you connected with someone. And then it'll be someone like me. There's about 4,000 of us actually, all over the US. It's also in the UK and Canada, if you wanted to know that, so they're expanding. And then what we do is we validate the feelings, we congratulate them for their courage and the strength it took to reach out. And even if the person is hopeless, we say at the very least, you did text in, you had the courage to text in and ask for support. So even if it doesn't feel like you have any hope left, you did just by texting in. We then listen, and we focus then on what do we do from here? And it can be those little things. What's something? Put down your phone. Depending on what time that they're texting in, sleep is a big one. You know, we've been texting for about an hour. Maybe you need to get some sleep. We can send links to resources. The big one is 211, and that can connect to local resources. Or it can just be, here's a website for you to look at that gives you some ideas on some safer activities than what you were thinking about. And the other thing I want you to know, it's not for youth. It's not just for youth, but it's also not just for suicide. It's called the crisis text line. So that can be whatever is a crisis for that person, it's a crisis for us. Does that help? Okay, and I'll be sticking around if you guys have more questions you want to talk one-on-one.
Nicely done. While you're coming up with additional questions, I wanted to invite you also to attend a program that's being jointly sponsored by the school district and the Mount Horeb Library. It's happening on Monday, September 24th at 6:30 p.m. In fact, probably in this very room. And it's called QPR. How many people have heard of QPR? Question, persuade, refer. And we have, this is now going to be the 4th time I think the community's hosted this, and we've hosted it a number of times in our schools, both for our staff, but as well as our students. I had an amazing student by the name of Declan Smith. He called me up the other day and he said, Dr. Salerno, I'd like to learn how to be a QPR trained leader. And he's going to help us that evening along with another individual who has been trained. He's going to follow along there. September 24th, 6:30 p.m., likely in this very room, which gives me an opportunity to thank that very special lady back there in the white sweater, Melissa Raleigh. Melissa, you all know Melissa. Melissa has been a fantastic partner. Her leadership, coupled with that of our executive director of the library, Jessica Williams, allows us to use this space for meaningful dialogue like this. Maybe time for a couple more questions before we introduce some of the other folks. Yes, sir. Good evening.
So my name's Tom Muscular, and I just wanted you to know that you're not alone here. I'm working with the Southwest Community Action Program out of Dodgeville, and we got a grant from the Medical College of Wisconsin, and we're working in the 5 counties next to you. So Iowa, Greene, Lafayette, Richland, and what am I missing? Grant? Yeah. And we're working on improving behavioral health care in those counties. And we're putting a particular emphasis on small rural towns and the farm crisis. And what I'm hearing about tonight in relationship to what's going on with the depressed economy for farmers and are concerned about that particular community. I was at the engineering school at the UW where we had received a Robert Wood Johnson grant to look at how we improve addiction treatment and mental health facilities around the country. And we work with providers all across the country. And when I left that work and I heard about this effort in Southwest Wisconsin, I couldn't help but do it because I farm by Blanchardville. And I was just running in between and came here to let you know that we care about what's happening here as well. So thank you.
Very nice. Thank you. Time for one more question in the general team. I see one back there. Hi. How are you? Absolutely.
So, a month or two ago, I was reflecting on my fears and my own experience with mental health, and I felt kind of needed to speak out. I have too many friends who suffer silently or were hospitalized while I lived their life. I've been confronted with challenges that I know teenagers who have to deal with. It hit me that I wish I had the information to help me deal with these situations. One of the most important things to preventing these events from ever happening in the first place. I and my peers need these tools to help ourselves and our friends in the future. Teens are on the front line of recognizing when one of our friends is struggling. What I'm proposing is that we need more resources and information that can reach out to when our friends are in crisis. There needs to be an open discussion between teens on tools that they have at their disposal specifically for teens, in addition to tools for adults, community leaders, and parents.
Can we give her a round of applause? Thank you so much for sharing, and thanks for advocating for your fellow classmates. That is our promise to you. It is a promise that we're going to continue to provide you, hopefully with even more tools. Allow for opportunities for conversations to take place. A gentleman by the name of Rick Peniston is in the audience tonight. Rick is our new high school principal. Good evening, Rick. Yeah, welcome. Rick, coupled with Deanne Lensert and Assistant Principal Nessheim, you already are talking with your staff about how to restructure the school day so students could have what's called an advisory period every day to provide these opportunities to have those kinds of conversations. And there will be many opportunities for us to do that. Thank you so much for being brave to stand up in front of this room tonight and share your perspective. It really was good for us to hear. Maybe a good place for us to kind of wrap up this portion of our conversation tonight before we do some breakouts is to introduce you to a number of key people here within the community that are there in partnership with you. And so I'm going to turn it over again to my friend Angela and see if you can do that for us.
Sure.
Thank you.
And we'd love to have you on the coalition.
Yes.
She can't hear me, but somebody tell her. We'd love to have you on the coalition. Yeah. Open invitation. So we won't pass the mic around, but I know that we have several people here who are a community resource, can provide support. Our hope is that they'll introduce themselves and the rest of you will say, oh, I want to talk to that person. And then we're going to kind of conclude this part and hope that people mill around and find the person that you want to talk to. There's handouts, which we've mentioned, on the back table with other resources. Oh, and there's a way to order the shirts. Is that going to be on the table? Okay. Oh, you were going to announce it. Yeah, okay. Sorry, she's reminding me. I said, yes, come announce. Do you want to come up and announce it?
So we weren't organized enough to like print out a little slip of paper with the URL to our link. That's probably not even the right language, but anyways, so you can order one of these shirts for $15, like Dr. Salerno said. We hope to use the proceeds from the t-shirts to be able to just continue to support the mental health efforts in Mount Horeb. So there is an online store through Market that's going to be open until Wednesday, August 8th. At that point, they'll close the online store for ordering. They'll print the shirts and they will be available for pickup at Market on August 17th. So I do have the link here if people want to. We can share it on Facebook. We can share it on Facebook. Feel free to take a picture of it. Yeah, thank you.
And just a reminder, if you want to receive the coalition's emails, you can find this orange sheet and write your name and email. Okay, so invite folks who are here who would just want to say who they are, organization that you're with, so that others know who you are. Who will be the first one?
I'll go. I have a friend. That are really small.
You might have to come here. It really doesn't reach far.
Alright, hi, I'm Lindsay Wallace. As Dr. Salerno mentioned, I work at NAMI-Dane County. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And what we do, we're not a treatment provider in the community, but we are focused on providing education and support around recognizing the warning signs of mental illness, how to engage in communication and problem-solving skills, and just provide that information and support that people need in times of finding help. And finding hope and finding support. We also do all of the mental health training for the law enforcement, corrections officers, and also other first responders that Nancy had mentioned earlier. So that's sort of some of the work that we do out in the community. We do have a youth initiative that we're very privileged and honored to be a part of at the meeting we have tomorrow. So we're looking at Ending the Silence, which is a 50-minute presentation to students on recognizing the warning signs and how to help your friend and how to help yourself as well. And then we also are launching this fall Ending the Silence for Teachers. So that's sort of a very short snippet of all of the work we do in the community, but we are a resource for you. We offer education classes, support groups. Please look us up online, and if you have any questions, I'll be here for a little while afterwards.
And NAMI's website is on the community resources handout that's back on the table.
I'm Jessie. I'm from A Grace Hospice and Palliative Care, and part of what A Grace provides is support to communities after a death, even if the person who died was not a hospice patient. So part of what we do is individual short-term support, so we can meet with people individually who are grieving a death. We also do support groups for adults and also for families, so that's for kids and adults at the same time. And then we also partner with FACE Kids, which I know has been mentioned, and we have done grief groups in Mount Horeb schools for the past many years. So I will also be around if you are interested in talking more about grief support, or if you have questions about what to look for in kids who are grieving, questions about if something is a typical or normal response after a death. I'm happy to talk with you about that as well.
Can we take a moment to also recognize our good folks from the school district who are here tonight? I'm going to miss people, so I'm not going to mention them by name, but you folks were our first responders to our students when we had the loss of Charlie and Joseph and so many others that we loved so much in our schools. They were there the very next day, early, talking with kids, talking with families, and I know that they too were grieving at the same time. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you all for what you've done for our kids too. Thank you.
And I want to be, and I'm glad that Grace is here also. I'm Mary Williams, and we also have a grief support group offered here in our community, and it's open.
I just want to make sure everyone can hear you.
Yeah.
Mind coming over here and speaking in the mic?
We do have a local grief support group that myself as a parish nurse helped start, and it's an ecumenically sponsored grief support group, and we offer it I was going to say January, usually April and October, and we'll always have announcements in the paper. The other thing that we have been helping with, but we meet at the senior center, is actually a caregiver support group, and it coincides with Rita Stanton's memory care, our memory cafe, but it's not limited to caregivers of older people. It's for anyone that is a caregiver, whether it's, that you have concerns about people and that you want to be good at, your listening skills and everything. So I just wanted to let you know that there are other resources in our community and that you don't have to travel very far.
Anyone else here? We have some members of our clergy here. If you just want to raise your hand, just so folks know who you are. Okay. Nicole, did you want to say? Yes. You want the microphone?
Okay, I wasn't going to speak up, but I feel it's important to know that I work in the ER at UW Hospital. I kind of moonlight there. And so a lot of folks come in at night that in mental health crisis, and I don't want you to be afraid. Don't meet people like me. I don't want you to be afraid. So if your family comes in and you have to, don't be afraid. There are social workers there, there's chaplains there, the nurses, the doctors. It does take a long time sometimes, and it is uncomfortable because it is a crisis, but you'll be okay. We're there to help you. You'll get the assessments you need. If you have to be admitted, you're on your way to recovery. Just remember that. Thanks.
Just again, my name is Nicole Schroder, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker with Platteville Family Resource Center, and we have recently opened a satellite office here in Mount Horeb. So we provide evidence-based treatment. We are trained in evidence-based treatment from birth to the wise. And so look forward to serving our community. And then I also just want to speak on behalf of our local clergy who have also been sort of working tirelessly to provide supports. And I was actually a part of why I love doing this work in collaboration is that I have just learned so much and was introduced to this book by Pastor Julie from the Methodist Church, who is also, sort of trying to spearhead a survivors of suicide group here in Mount Horeb. So this book is called Good Night, Mr. Van Gogh, and I personally love just reading books as a way of educating and opening conversation with kids, and Pastor Julie is working on, I think, getting a copy here. Oh, we have 5 copies coming. So there will be copies of this at the library, as well as donating a couple of copies to student services. Autographed copies.
Who's the provider if you wanted your child to have some therapy? What do you take for insurance?
So we are credentialed with all insurance companies except for GHC. GHC has not, honored our request at this time. There has been some awesome advocacy and outreach by Dr. Salerno and some community members. Dean, Unity, Courts, P+, UMR, UHC, you name it, Medicare, Medicaid, all of the Badger Care HMO plans, and then if by chance I think we've covered the bases of the insurances, but there's always sort of those unique ones that maybe we don't know about, and so what we can do then is we can, if you bring that to us, we will complete the paperwork to get credentialed with your insurance provider. And if you do have GHC, I would highly recommend that you advocate to GHC, not only on behalf of us, I think, as mental health providers, but also for our primary care doctors here in the community as well.
On the book thing, we have some. We actually pulled some out tonight right where you're standing. Nora, and we worked with Nancy, and our children's librarian, Nora pulled out a bunch of books really for talking with kids. Because we agree that books are kind of a natural step, easier step maybe to kind of broach the topic sometimes. So please peruse those. And we have other ones for adults as well. Your library has a lot of resources, obviously, and if you can't remember a phone number, you can't remember who was brought up tonight, call us. We will help you find the numbers that you need too, so just know that.
We have the best library.
So my name is Pastor Jared, and I'm a pastor here in our community, and I did want to just mention that one of the things that makes this community so great, in my opinion, is that all of the clergy here in town, we all work together, we get along, and to be able to provide opportunities for dialogue within that setting, whether you're a person of faith or not. Also, I wanted to let you know that you may have seen, usually people see me with my dog. Hooper is a therapy dog. He got a bath tonight, so he's not here with us. But I found that if sometimes it's really hard to get children to talk about things that are affecting them, and if you wanted to have an opportunity for Hooper and I as a therapy team to come and speak to your child, or allow your child to speak to him, he's a good listener. But it is a great opportunity. Sometimes they'll say things to him that they won't say to anybody else. And so if you would like that opportunity, then just see me in the back and we can make sure that happens. So yeah, that'll be helpful.
We have a hand up in the back.
I'm Abby Schroder. I'm a psychiatric therapist for Green County Human Services and also a mobile crisis worker and board authorizer for Chapter 51. And I also work with the Monroe district providing psychosocial education on mental health. I am also contracted with Monticello School System, and we've created a program called Pony Patrol SOS, and SOS stands for Stomping Out Stigma, and we're working toward educating students all the way from kindergarten through 12 on mental health before it becomes an issue. So often we don't address the issue until it's there, it is present, and we're in a crisis. But kids need to know about mental health, and that's the goal of our program. I also, we have referrals, and teacher can make referrals to me, and I'll assess the students to determine what their level of need is, and if I can provide some brief supports for them in school, I do that. Otherwise, I refer them to a provider outside of school. So just I'm happy to let you know what we're doing, and I work closely with the guidance counselors in the schools as well, so just to be a resource, and if anybody needs more information, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're getting close to 2 hours, and people might be wanting to stretch their legs. So what I invite you to do now is seek out the folks who have introduced themselves or members of the coalition if you want to talk to us. Please fill out those little white half sheets, the feedback forms, and just give them to one of us in a teal shirt, or you can leave them in a stack on the table back there. We welcome your feedback. We need your feedback, so please take the time to fill those out. And thank you so much for being here.